Picture this: Prague, winter of 1378. The night hangs low over the city like a sheet of hammered iron, its edges softened only by the faint glow of tallow lamps trembling in the wind. Snow gathers on the buttresses of Charles Bridge, muffling sound, muting footsteps, and swallowing sin beneath its quiet weight. But inside the stone belly of an abandoned tannery, a place the city avoids even in daylight, light pulses against the cracked walls in frantic rhythms, blue, red, crimson, colors no flame should possess. At the center of the room stands Master Aurelius von Hagen, an alchemist whose name never officially appears in royal records, though his influence shaped the continent more than any king alive. His hands hover over a basin lined with lead and bone ash, where a substance, thin as breath, bright as lightning, quivers like a living thing. His apprentice, a boy no older than 14, watches with wide, terrified eyes. They are alone, or rather, they believe they are. But beyond the cracked shutters, two figures in cloaks stand perfectly still, their breaths crystallizing in the cold. They belong to the Order of St. Basil, a monastic faction secretly tasked by the Church with hunting heresy in all its forms. They have tracked Aurelius for months through ruined monasteries, secret gatherings, and underground marketplaces where forbidden manuscripts change hands alongside severed organs and preserved tongues. Tonight, they expect to witness ritual magic. What they see instead freezes their souls. Because when Aurelius pours a single drop of the shimmering substance onto a piece of raw iron, the metal convulses like muscle. It softens, reshapes, reforms into a perfect sphere, as if the laws of nature themselves bowed before the alchemist's hand. The apprentice gasps. The watchers outside cross themselves. Aurelius whispers a single sentence into the steaming air. This is not alchemy. This is obedience. And in that moment, the forbidden truth of medieval science flickers into existence. Alchemy was never a dream of gold. It was a dream of dominion, over matter, over God, over the soul itself. Before we continue, if you love uncovering the buried truths that history tried to erase, consider subscribing to Whispers of History. Tell me where you're listening from. Is it morning or night where you are? Across centuries and continents, our shared curiosity is what keeps these forgotten stories alive now. Let us return to the shadows. What you're about to hear is not merely the story of medieval alchemy, nor a catalogue of strange experiments and strange minds chasing impossible light. It is the story of an intellectual underground that stretched from Prague to Florence, from Cordoba to Cairo, hidden in monasteries, apothecaries, and royal courts. It is the story of men and women who believed the natural world could be rewritten, and whose secret work, though suppressed, burned, and declared heresy, would quietly lay the foundations of modern chemistry, metallurgy, medicine, and more fearfully methods of control that rulers still rely on today. Alchemy was never a harmless art practiced by dreamers. It was a battlefield, a war fought with crucibles instead of swords, manuscripts instead of proclamations, symbols instead of armies. And it began, as most revolutions do, with a generation shaped by trauma. Aurelius von Hagen was born in 1347, the year the Black Death entered Europe. By the time he was 5, he had seen more death than most kings witness in a lifetime. The plague killed his mother in hours. His father, a metal worker, collapsed days later, his skin blackened, his breath thick with blood. In the chaos that followed, with carts of corpses clogging the streets, and priests chanting prayers that went unanswered, Europe whispered a single fear. God had abandoned them. Some sought salvation in prayer. Others sought escape in sin. But a few, an extraordinary few, sought answers in experiment, in matter, in the hidden architecture of creation. These were the proto-alchemists, heirs to forgotten Arabic texts smuggled from Andalusian libraries and Greek, manuscripts rescued from Constantinople-esque scholars fleeing Ottoman advance. They inherited the work of Jaber ibn Hayyan, Zosimos of Panopolis, and Maria the Jewess, names revered in secret, punished in public. By the time Aurelius reached adulthood, monasteries had turned into laboratories. Scriptoria became research centers hidden beneath layers of incense smoke. The church forbade certain texts, only to have monks copy them by candlelight. Alchemical knowledge spread like the plague that birthed it, silently, exponentially. And yet, for all their ambition, early alchemists remained bound by fear. Every experiment carried two risks, the wrath of God and the wrath of the church. So when Aurelius discovered something no one before him had ever achieved, the transmutation of matter at room temperature, he knew at once that he had crossed an invisible line. He had stepped from science into sacrilege. Because while alchemists dreamed of gold, Aurelius dreamed of something far more treacherous, the recreation of life itself. Historians still debate whether his earliest notes described the birth of a homunculus, a miniature being synthesized from mercury, sulfur, and human bone, or simply an unstable chemical reaction misunderstood by medieval eyes. His manuscripts, recovered centuries later from beneath a collapsed friary, describe a trembling mass that desired heat and substance that drinks breath. But nowhere does Aurelius claim to have made life. He only writes, "I touched the boundary and felt it breathe back." His students whispered that he experimented not on animals, but on condemned prisoners secretly delivered to him through sympathetic guards. Records from 1374 mention 3 inmates who disappeared from Thun prison without explanation. Their names appear months later in Aurelius' encoded notes beside diagrams of anatomical distortions that modern scholars still argue over. The church, sensing danger, dispatched investigators disguised as charitable brothers. They reported fires that burned with no fuel, metal that melted in bare hands, vials that glowed like moonlit water even in sealed chests. But the question that frightened them most was not how, it was why. Aurelius's goal was not wealth, not fame, not immortality. It was dominance over nature, a power that threatened both God and king. By autumn of 1378, rumors of his work reached King Wenceslas IV, whose advisors feared the political implications. If alchemists could reshape metal, they could reshape weapons. If they could manipulate the body, they could alter succession. If they could command matter itself, then they could command power that kings could neither grant nor control. So the king issued a secret order: recruit Aurelius or destroy him. And on this frozen night in Prague, as the strange substance coils like a serpent awakening, in his crucible, the choice is moments away. Because the watchers outside the tannery have made theirs. They draw steel, step closer, and prepare to end the most dangerous alchemist alive. What happens next would ignite a chain of events that reshaped medieval science, shattered kingdoms, and exposed the darkest ambitions of the alchemical underground. The door splintered inward before Aurelius could extinguish the crucible. The cloaked figures of the Order of St. Basil stormed the tannery with brutal precision. No shouts, no warnings, just steel whispering through frozen air. Their boots struck the stone floor with the finality of a verdict. The apprentice stumbled backward, knocking over a rack of dried hides. Aurelius did not move. He simply watched them with the calm of a man who had already learned how fear destroys judgment. The leader of the intruders stepped forward. He removed his hood slowly, revealing a gaunt face carved by a life of obedience and suspicion. "Master Aurelius von Hagen," he said, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "In the name of God and the Holy Church, you are to be taken." He never finished the sentence, because at that exact moment, the trembling substance in the crucible reacted to the cold draft from the shattered door. It surged upward like a column of lightning, striking the ceiling in a crack of sound that shook dust from the rafters. The Order's men froze in terror. The creature of light, for there is no better word, twisted in the air like a serpent made of molten glass. It pulsed once, twice, then collapsed into the basin as if losing its will to exist. The room filled with a metallic scent that clung to the skin, the kind of smell soldiers associate with freshly spilled blood. Aurelius exhaled. The Order drew their swords tighter. This moment, recorded only in fragmented testimonies and a single trembling account from a surviving apprentice, marks the beginning of what alchemists would later call the Great Persecution. But Aurelius did not resist. Instead, he did something that stunned even the hardened fanatics of the order. He knelt, not in surrender, but in calculation. Because Aurelius knew what they did not. Once the church saw what he had made, they would not kill him. They would recruit him, before they could bind his hands. The apprentice, trembling, pale, flooded with equal parts loyalty and terror, seized the lead-lined basin and sprinted through a side passage. He vanished into the maze of frozen alleys with the last remnant of Aurelius' living experiment clutched to his chest. The order noticed, too late. They apprehended Aurelius, but the true threat slipped into the night. The chronicles of the order described the capture soberly, without acknowledging the flicker of fear in their writing. But the apprentice's escape was catastrophic. Because while the church believed it had contained the danger, it had not. It had only scattered it. Aurelius was imprisoned beneath the old town hall in a stone chamber carved long before the city existed. The walls were etched with symbols no guard could decipher, remnants of earlier civilizations whose knowledge lingered like ghosts in the mortar. The church intended to interrogate him slowly, extract secrets, break his will. But Aurelius welcomed the silence. For the first time in years, he could think. And what he thought about was not rescue nor escape. It was the recipe. The shimmering substance, the obedient metal, had been his first step toward what medieval alchemists called the great work, the transformation not of metals but of humanity, the elevation of the base into the divine. Most alchemists believed the great work ended with the philosopher's stone, a substance that could turn lead into gold, heal any illness, and grant long life. But Aurelius had already surpassed them. He sought something older, darker, and far more dangerous. A method of rewriting the structure of matter itself, bypassing nature's laws entirely. Documents discovered centuries later in a sealed reliquary describe his true objective: to separate the breath from the clay, to command the clay, and to give the breath new form. These cryptic lines remain debated by modern scholars. Some claim Aurelius was attempting early biochemistry. Others believe he pursued protometallurgy. A few insist he was seeking to create artificial life, a homunculus, as earlier alchemists had theorized. But all agree on this. Whatever Aurelius attempted required human sacrifice, direct or indirect. And the apprentice who fled into the night, carrying the newborn substance, would unknowingly complete the part Aurelius never could. For while Aurelius languished in the depths beneath Prague, Europe was changing. A storm of intellect and ambition gathering in murmuring circles. Florence, Cordoba, Krakow, Cairo, Damascus, Paris, cities connected not by roads, but by smuggled manuscripts, by late-night experiments lit only by oil lamps, by secret letters encoded with symbols only true alchemists could read. This was the birth of the European Alchemical Network, an underground brotherhood of monks, physicians, astronomers, metalworkers, and scholars who believed knowledge was worth dying for. They communicated through drawings of serpents eating their own tails, the Ouroboros, through coded marginalia, through recipes disguised as prayers. Their goal was not gold, never gold. It was enlightenment, mastery, transcendence. But with Aurelius's capture came panic. If the church had arrested one of their greatest minds, others might follow. They needed their own order, a counterforce. Thus was born the Order of the Aureate Flame, named after Aurelius himself. Its members saw the imprisoned alchemist not as a cautionary tale, but as a martyr. And they had a mission: recover the apprentice, recover the substance, complete the great work. Meanwhile, the church created its own solution. The Order of St. Basil, once merely tasked with policing heresy, was elevated into a clandestine force with sweeping authority. They were granted powers no arm of the church had ever possessed: the right to seize property without trial, to imprison without accusation, to burn without verdict. Their leader, Brother Matthias, wrote in his private codex, "The war for man's soul is no longer fought in confessionals, it is fought in laboratories." The two orders, one born from curiosity, the other from fear, began a shadow war across Europe. But Aurelius, chained beneath the city, remained the axis. He refused to speak at first, refused to react to threats, starvation, or torture, until they made their greatest mistake. They brought him a manuscript confiscated from his workshop, his own notes, written in a code they could not break. "Tell us what this means," the Inquisitor demanded. Aurelius laughed, the first sound he had made in 2 weeks, because he finally understood something profound. They needed him, they feared him, and they had no idea that he had already won. His apprentice was still out there. The living metal was still out there. The great work had already begun. All he needed was time. And time is the only thing a prison ever gives. But what neither the Church nor the Order of the Aureate Flame yet realized was this: the apprentice carrying Aurelius' creation would not remain hidden for long, and the experiments he was about to unleash would shake the medieval world to its core. The apprentice did not run far, barefoot, shivering, clutching the lead-lined basin beneath his coat. He stumbled through the frozen alleys of Prague until the city thinned into clusters of wooden cottages. No one noticed the boy. Winter had reduced the poor to ghosts, but he carried something too bright to hide for long. By dawn, he reached the edge of the vault of a river, where ice clung in jagged plates like broken teeth. He stopped inside a ruined chapel, a place long abandoned after plague corpses were once stacked knee-high inside. Only a handful of villagers still believed it cursed, which is why it made the perfect refuge. He pried open the basin. Inside, the substance still quivered, but changed. During his frantic escape, the cold had altered its structure. It no longer shimmered like liquid metal. Instead, it pulsated gently, like a heartbeat wrapped in translucent skin. When the apprentice touched it, the substance recoiled. When he whispered to it, it warmed. Whatever Aurelius had made was evolving. That same morning, while the boy hid with a living experiment he barely understood, Prague echoed with the sound of armored boots. The Order of St. Basil searched every workshop, every apothecary, every cellar. Their interrogations were fast and merciless, but they found nothing. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that news travels quickly when fear is involved. By dusk, word of Aurelius's arrest had reached the hidden circles of Europe's alchemical underground, and the Order of the Aureate Flame moved swiftly. Letters traveled across borders sewn into seams of winter cloaks. Encrypted diagrams crossed the Alps disguised as illuminated psalms. Chemical recipes were hidden inside the margins of Bibles written in inks visible only by firelight. The network activated its most trusted agents, scribes in monasteries, who copied forbidden manuscripts at night, metalsmiths in Florence, who smuggled powders in shipments of silver, or Arab chemists in Cordoba, who provided distillation equipment far superior to anything produced in Christian lands. Even Jewish physicians in Krakow, persecuted yet indispensable, contributed knowledge of anatomy unavailable anywhere else. For centuries, alchemy had been fragmented, tiny sparks scattered across Europe. Now, for the first time, it ignited into a coordinated flame. But the Church adapted. Brother Matthias, the head of the Order of St. Basil, was no ordinary fanatic. He understood that ideas couldn't be burned by flame alone. They had to be replaced. So he created something unprecedented. Authorized alchemists. These state-sanctioned scholars were given controlled access to manuscripts, laboratories, and royal patronage, but bound by strict oaths. Their task was simple: produce results the Church could use, and destroy anything it could not control. Church alchemy pursued, purifying metals for coinage, refining medicines for bishops and nobles, developing incendiary compounds for war, and synthesizing pigments for religious art. But beneath the surface, another motive drove them to replicate Aurelius's living metal and weaponize it. They failed, again and again, because Aurelius had not merely manipulated matter, he had violated its nature, and only his apprentice possessed a surviving fragment. Meanwhile, the Order of the Aureate Flame searched relentlessly for the boy. They followed footprints in the snow, bribed beggars, interrogated blacksmiths. They found the ruined chapel a week too late. Inside, they discovered scorch marks on the altar and walls lightly etched with fingerprints burned into stone. Evidence the substance had reacted violently, but the apprentice was gone. In his place, they found something stranger, a series of charcoal sketches depicting transformation, metal bending like wax over a candle flame, stone dissolving into powder, a shape vaguely human rising from a pool of liquid silver. The flame recognized these as the earliest steps toward the great work. If the apprentice completed it, Aurelius's dream of commanding creation itself might come true. They left the chapel in silence, knowing the war was now larger than a single man. In the months that followed, alchemy evolved from a fragmented pursuit into a strategic force. The church built laboratories, the flame built counter-laboratories, and the apprentice built something else entirely, a pathway toward the unimaginable. He traveled first to Kutnahora, a mining town where silver veins ran like frozen rivers beneath the earth. Here he sought metals capable of stabilizing the living substance. Miners whispered about strange lights in abandoned shafts, the glow of his makeshift experiments. Then he moved south, toward Vienna, where Jewish physicians taught him how blood behaves under heat, how bone ash binds with metals, how life itself disintegrates layer by layer. They saw brilliance in his questions, and fear in the way he never slept. By summer, he reached Padua, then a flourishing university city. There he befriended a young scholar obsessed with Aristotle's forbidden treatises on generation and corruption. Together they experimented in the catacombs beneath the basilica, mixing human marrow with heated alloys, distilling breath from crushed mint leaves, attempting to fuse living and non-living matter. Their notebooks, preserved centuries later in a Franciscan archive, describe a trembling membrane forming over molten metal and shapes appearing within steam like the silhouettes of unborn things. They were close, too close. Because one night, beneath the cathedral's stone floor, an experiment went terribly wrong. A mixture of mercury, bone ash, and the living metal erupted in a blast of blue fire. The student died instantly, his lungs crystallized, his veins blackened like charred roots. The apprentice survived only because he shielded himself behind a marble sarcophagus. The church blamed the explosion on improper handling of incense oils. The Order of the Aureate Flame knew better, and the apprentice fled again, this time carrying a vial of something new, a substance that reacted not to heat, but to human breath. From this moment on, the war entered a deadlier phase. The church no longer sought to control alchemists, it sought to erase them. Mass arrests swept through Paris, Florence, and Krakow. Manuscripts were burned in marketplaces. Laboratories were sealed beneath monasteries, with stone slabs bearing Latin curses. But with every suppression, the alchemical underground grew more radical, more secretive, more unified. Encrypted networks formed physicians who harvested organs from plague victims, apothecaries who traded poisons disguised as spices, metal workers who designed crucibles capable of surviving unnatural temperatures, scribes who copied manuscripts using inks invisible until heated above human body temperature. This was no longer a community of scholars. It was a shadow civilization, and at its center, knowingly or not, stood a terrified apprentice, carrying the one substance that could reshape the medieval world. But while Europe hunted a boy carrying Aurelius's secret, something far more dangerous emerged from his experiments, something neither the church nor the alchemists could contain. It happened in the summer of 1380, the year Europe would whisper about 4 generations, though rarely with truth. A shepherd boy wandered into the abandoned ossuary near Sedlik, following the echo of a sound he described later as metal breathing. At first he thought thieves had stolen into the crypt, but what he found froze his voice in his throat. The air shimmered faintly like heat above a forge. Bones, human bones cleaned long ago by plague fires, were strewn across the floor in unnatural arrangements. Some had fused together at the joints, others twisted into unfamiliar shapes. In the center of the chamber lay a pool of molten silver that never cooled. Defying both nature and the laws every metalsmith knew by heart. Above it hovered a thin membrane of transparent film, trembling as if stirred by invisible wind. It pulsed when the boy stepped closer, pulsed harder when he breathed, then recoiled violently when he screamed. By the time soldiers arrived, the creature, if creature it could be called, had collapsed into a pool of shimmering residue, like the earliest substance Aurelius had made. The apprentice was nowhere to be seen, but he had been there, and the world would soon understand what he had done. Word spread quickly, too quickly. The church tried to suppress the story, but soldiers gossip. Monks whisper. Shepherd boys cannot be silenced forever. Rumors passed from tavern to monastery, from scribe to noblewoman, from miner to merchant. The stories differed in detail, but shared one horrifying thread. Something was forming. Something neither fully alive nor fully dead, and it responded to breath. Brother Matthias ordered an immediate investigation. He personally traveled to Sedlik with a retinue of theologians, physicians, and armed guards. Their account, locked away for centuries, describes a heat inside the ossuary with no discernible source, burn marks on stone columns untouched by fire, and a lingering scent not of rot nor incense, but of lightning. The Order of St. Basil reached one conclusion. This was Aurelius's work, and it had evolved. Matthias demanded the alchemist be brought from his cell. Aurelius, gaunt but defiant, refused to speak. When shown sketches from the ossuary, he merely smiled, a thin, knowing curve that terrified the guards more than any confession, because he recognized the transformation. The apprentice had reached the second stage of the great work, coagulation, the moment when matter begins to take shape, obeying not the laws of nature, but the will of the experimenter. Aurelius knew what came next: fixation, generation, manifestation. Stages medieval scholars would later claim were metaphorical, never literal, but Aurelius knew better. His apprentice had crossed a threshold he himself had feared to approach. By the time Matthias returned to Prague, panic had already seeded itself across the city. Doors bolted early, markets emptied, priests delivered sermons drenched in warnings about demons, witchcraft, and the dangers of unholy breath. Alchemists vanished into hiding. Laboratories were smashed by angry mobs who believed silver would come alive and devour them in their sleep. But beneath this chaos, one group moved with purpose. The Order of the Aureate Flame had tracked every whisper, every sighting of the apprentice. They traced him from Sedlik to Kutna-Hora, then southward again. Each abandoned site held evidence more advanced than the last: vats of water that froze and boiled at the same time, silver veins that grew like vines, air pockets vibrating with faint metallic resonance, stone softened into clay simply by touching vapors rising from a crucible. The flame knew what these signs meant. The apprentice was no longer experimenting, he was assembling. Their codices described the great work, not as a single act, but as a sequence, a progression from transformation of matter to transformation of being. Few alchemists ever ventured beyond distillation or calcination. Even Aurelius had stopped at the threshold. But the apprentice, freed from fear and fueled by desperation, had no such boundaries. His path finally led to the caves beneath the Carpathian foothills, a place so remote even kings forgot to claim it. Here, miners unearthed strange minerals, long believed cursed, pitch-black stones that sparked when struck, veins of ore that hummed faintly in the dark, pockets of air that sickened torches. Within these caverns, the apprentice established his final laboratory. It was not a workshop, it was a womb. He lined the walls with sheets of hammered metal stolen from monasteries, filled clay amphorae with mixtures of bone ash, river salts, and silver alloy, etched symbols derived from Arabic manuscripts into pillars 10 feet high, suspended animal bladders filled with distilled breath, from the dying collected in battlefields, plague houses, and execution yards. Every element had purpose. Every symbol had intention. At the center of the cavern stood a crucible 4 times larger than any medieval furnace, a basin capable of holding a human body. And inside it lay a mass of quivering substance, neither liquid nor solid, shifting with the slow cadence of something beginning to dream. The apprentice recorded in his notes, preserved centuries later, by accident, that it responded to his voice, adjusting its form like a child learning to stand. He called it the aberration, a name chosen not from horror, but reverence. Meanwhile, the church finally pieced together the truth. Aurelius had not been the threat. The apprentice was Brother Matthias, ordered the largest manhunt in church history. Hundreds of men rode into the Carpathian forests, armed with torches, crosses, and iron stakes. But the flame was already there. They too had tracked the apprentice, not to stop him, but to protect the culmination of Aurelius's vision. And so the two clandestine forces collided inside the mountains. Their clash was not a battle of armies, but a struggle of philosophies. Faith versus knowledge, authority versus curiosity, control versus transcendence. In the heat of pursuit, smoke from burning torches filtered into the caverns. The aberration reacted before either side could intervene. The creature surged upward, expanding like molten glass forced into the shape of a human silhouette. It emitted a low, resonant tone that cracked stalactites and extinguished flames. Soldiers screamed, monks fled, even the flame hesitated. And in that moment of confusion, the apprentice stepped forward, not with the timidity of a runaway boy, but with the certainty of a man who had mastered creation. "You feared the plague," he said softly, "but the plague only revealed your fragility. I give you dominion." The aberration shuddered, half-formed limbs reaching toward him. But before it could rise fully, a single arrow struck the apprentice in the chest. It came from an unknown archer. Some claim it was a monk. Others swear it was one of the flame, horrified by what their own brethren desired. History never confirmed the truth. The apprentice staggered. The aberration convulsed violently, and the cavern began to collapse. What followed was neither victory nor defeat, but a silence so profound that Europe would spend centuries trying to interpret what truly died in those caverns, and what might have survived beneath the falling stone. When the cavern fell, it did not roar like a mountain collapsing, it sighed. Witnesses described the sound as a long exhalation, the breath of something ancient releasing its hold on the world. Then the ground quaked, sending dust spiraling into the forest. For hours afterward, tremors rippled through the earth like distant footsteps, fading into darkness. The Order of St. Basil, bruised and terrified, reported that the apprentice had died instantly from the arrow. But those who survived the collapse spoke of something stranger. They claimed his body never struck the ground. Instead, it dissolved into threads of shimmering vapor that spiraled into the aberration's collapsing form. The creature itself vanished beneath tons of rock, or so history claimed. In the days that followed, panic swept across Europe. Villagers reported seeing silver-veined earth pulse beneath their fields. Miners refused to enter shafts where dust seemed to twist in unnatural patterns. Priests doubled their sermons. Kings issued decrees outlawing alchemical practice. Monasteries burned their laboratories rather than risk accusation. The great work was declared dead. But knowledge never dies, it only hides. The Order of the Aureate Flame mourned the apprentice as a martyr. In secret gatherings lit by a single candle placed upon a plate of hammered silver, they whispered that his sacrifice completed a cycle Aurelius had only begun. They believed the aberration had not perished, only retreated deeper into the earth, waiting for a mind capable of awakening it once more. The church insisted otherwise. Brother Matthias, though shaken, declared the incident a divine correction. He sealed Aurelius's manuscripts in the deepest vault beneath Prague, placing curses upon the door and ordering that no record of the alchemist ever be spoken in public again. Then he made a fateful decision. He visited Aurelius in his stone cell to announce the apprentice's death. The alchemist listened in silence. His hands, once steady and precise, now trembled from weeks of deprivation. When Matthias finished, Aurelius looked up, and in his eyes flickered a grief so deep it seemed to extinguish the torchlight. "You believe the work dies with the worker," he whispered. "But clay remembers the hand that shapes it. Breath remembers the mouth that gives it form." Matthias accused him of blasphemy. Aurelius smiled. the same thin smile he had given the day of his arrest. "For years you feared the fire," he said. "But it is the silence you should have feared." 2 weeks later, Aurelius von Hagen was found dead in his cell. No wounds, no signs of struggle. Only a faint metallic sheen coating his fingertips. A residue that confounded every physician who examined him. The church recorded the death as natural. The flame recorded it as ascension. Historians still argue. For a generation, the world fell quiet. Alchemy retreated into basements, monasteries, and hidden workshops. Kings discouraged its practice. Universities pretended it had never existed, but the manuscripts survived. A century later, during the rise of Renaissance humanism, the sealed vault beneath Prague was broken open by scholars seeking ancient texts. They documented what they found with trembling hands. Hundreds of pages filled with symbols that defied translation. Diagrams of organs overlaid with geometric lattice. Recipes using substances no longer found in nature. Marginalia describing breath captured in crystal. They also found something else. A lead-lined basin, cracked, empty. And beside it, a faint outline of a human hand burned into the stone floor, as if someone long ago had pressed their palm into molten rock. The scholars debated what it meant. Some dismissed it as symbolic. Others believed it was the apprentice's final plea. But all agreed on one thing. The knowledge contained within those manuscripts was centuries ahead of its time. And dangerous. The vault was resealed. Then broken open again in the 1600s by imperial agents. Then hidden once more. Then rediscovered by chemists in the 18th century, who declared the manuscripts nonsense, but secretly kept them. And so the cycle continued. Knowledge buried, knowledge unearthed, knowledge reborn. Over the centuries, bits of Aurelius's work seeped into modern science. Metallurgists reinterpreted his techniques as early alloy manipulation. Physicians studied his anatomical diagrams for insights overlooked by medieval medicine. Chemists recognized crude descriptions of catalytic reactions. And philosophers debated the moral implications of humans trying to command matter itself. But the question that haunted scholars most was not how Aurelius achieved what he did. It was why, and it is here, in the tension between ambition and fear, between creation and catastrophe, that his legacy truly lies. For all his brilliance, Aurelius von Hagen never sought wealth, fame, or gold. He sought mastery over the boundary between life and matter. A boundary medieval Europe believed sacred. His apprentice, driven by devotion rather than caution, crossed that boundary entirely. The aberration, whatever it truly was, became more myth than memory. Villagers spoke of silver shadows drifting through Carpathian forests. Miners swore they heard breathing in the deepest shafts. Priests warned children not to wander near the old caverns on certain nights when the air grew metallic and still. Most dismissed these tales as superstition. Yet in 1791, when an earthquake opened a fissure near the original collapse site, explorers descended into the newly exposed caverns. They found no creature, but they found patterns in the stone that defied explanation. Swirls resembling giant fingerprints, hardened layers shaped like ripples of liquid metal, and walls bearing scars that suggested something had once pressed outward with great force. The aberration had not simply vanished. It had left an imprint. And perhaps that was always the final truth of the great work. Transformation does not begin with matter. Transformation begins with memory. As we close this story, return with me to the first image, Aurelius standing in the abandoned tannery, blue, and crimson light flickering against the walls, whispering that his creation was not alchemy but obedience. In the end, it was neither. It was a mirror. A reflection of humanity's oldest hunger to reshape the world, to surpass nature, to command the elements with the authority of gods. And, like all such ambitions, it demanded sacrifice, secrecy, and silence. Whether the great work succeeded or failed depends on which records you believe. But one truth remains. Europe was never the same again. Not after Aurelius. Not after the apprentice. Not after the moment matter seemed to breathe. Because some fires never die. They simply burn deeper into stone, into memory, into us. Before you go, if this descent into history's hidden darkness intrigued you, another secret awaits. Click the next story appearing on your screen to continue our journey through time. And remember to subscribe to Whispers of History, because the past still whispers, if you know how to listen.